My name is Valentina Morgan, 33 years old, living alone in the suburbs of Santa Rosa, California. That morning, I stood silently at the gates of the Morgan Estate Vineyard, where my brother's wedding was taking place. I wasn't on the guest list. To aid casually, that spot suits you better. Have you ever been pushed aside by your own family like you were a stain on their polished celebration? If you've ever felt like a stranger in the very home you grew up in, leave a comment below. Hit like if you've ever been forgotten, and don't forget to subscribe, because the story I'm about to tell will turn everything they tried to bury upside down. I'm not one to dwell on the past, but some cracks, if left unspoken, spread quietly. Until one day, they collapse everything. On my 23rd birthday, my grandfather, Schlarmagol, handed me a wine bottle with my name on it, Valentina's crest. It wasn't a bestseller, but it was the first wine made entirely to my taste. From fermented grape to hand-curated aging. He added it to the tasting menu at that year's autumn festival. I still remember how my hands trembled when I saw my name on that glass label, like a warm mist wrapped around my chest. "You've got a nose for genius," he told me when I was a child. "You don't just taste with your tongue, you taste with memory." I thought I belonged there forever. I thought I was born from that land. Then the accident happened. One late evening, I was driving back from a meeting with a distributor when a sudden storm hit. Headlights from the opposite direction flashed like a warning I couldn't make sense of. When I opened my eyes in the hospital, the only person by my side was my grandmother, Clara. Her wrinkled hands gripped mine tightly, as if letting go would mean I'd disappear from this world. "You're still here, aren't you, Valentina?" she whispered. I nodded, but I had lost my sense of taste. Not completely, but enough to make a wine taster stop. My mother couldn't hide her disappointment. "You can't build a life on a tongue that doesn't work," she said when I was discharged. "Maybe it's time you considered another role." That other role meant being sidelined, left out of meetings, removed from the distribution board, no invite to the annual Vineyard Gala. My younger brother, Zachary, just 25 at the time, suddenly became the ideal successor. I still tried. I offered to help with brand communications, customer experience, anything that didn't require tasting. But every time I stepped into a room, both Zachary and my mother looked at me like I was crashing a party I wasn't invited to. "You're dragging out something that's already dead," Zachary once said when I pitched a new marketing idea. "Who do you think you are, trying to reshape this legacy?" I stood silent, staring into the eyes that used to call me the best big sister in the world, now cold and rehearsed, just like my mother's. I left on a winter morning, no tears, no farewell note. I simply left my lab key on the wooden counter in the aging room, beside a notebook filled with formulas from trial blends. I thought someone, anyone, would keep it. 2 months later, I heard that Grandma Clara had passed in her sleep from a stroke. I wasn't mentioned in the obituary. I wasn't called to the funeral. I only learned about it from a former neighbor I bumped into. "I thought you weren't coming back," she said. "They said you'd moved to Europe to pursue something else." I just smiled. No one knew I had been living less than 70 miles away, in a cabin near the pines, surviving by writing wine reviews for an anonymous magazine. I still read, still sampled, still worked to regain my sense of taste, identifying herbs and dried florals by scent. No one knew I once cried after sensing a hint of lemon in a glass of Sauvignon Blanc. Only one person still remembered I existed: Grandpa Walter. Every holiday, he secretly sent me an old bottle of wine with a handwritten note. "Don't forget you once turned grapes into magic." I kept them all in a wooden box under my bed, where no one could touch them. My mother never called. Zachary, now the face of the brand, appeared on trade magazines, posing with celebrity chefs. In every interview, he mentioned Grandma Clara and Grandpa Walter as founders, never once mentioning me. I wasn't angry. I didn't blame them. I just remembered. Until this morning, when I returned to the land that once felt like my own, standing still under the blistering Napa sun, smelling oak, fermentation, and something else. Something only those who belonged would recognize. The scent of buried memories. It was there that I discovered the truth about my grandfather, and from that moment on, everything began to unravel in a way none of them could control. I was still standing near the kitchen area, where the smell of frying oil and damp garbage clung to the air. My dress was dusty, its hem stained by watermarks on the uneven tile floor. A young server avoided my eyes as he passed, balancing a tray of champagne. No stop, no question. I didn't blame him. He was probably told not to serve me. At first, the distant hum sounded like bees in the breeze. But it grew louder, stronger, until glassware on nearby tables began to tremble. The crowd turned their heads, and the noise of conversation slowly fell into silence. A sleek black helicopter descended from the clear Napa sky, sending the ribbon garlands flying off the trellis. My mother stood frozen in the aisle, her champagne glass trembling. Zachary, laughing with friends near the reflecting pool, went stiff, his wineglass slipping from his fingers. I stepped forward to see more clearly, and when the helicopter door opened, I could hardly believe my eyes. Grandpa Walter Morgan stepped out, upright and steady. A finely tailored light gray suit hugged his tall, lean frame. Silver-rimmed sunglasses, neatly combed white hair, and a pale blue pocket square. Grandma's favorite color, tucked in just right. Two men in dark suits followed him, his lawyer and his private security guard. A driver wearing a headset signaled the crowd to move back. No one knew what was happening. No one knew how to respond. I stood frozen. I had believed them. Believed he was in a nursing home, too mentally frail to handle anything. Every holiday my mother would say casually, "Your grandpa barely remembers anything now," and Zachary would chime in, "He can't even unlock his phone. How's he supposed to remember a will?" Yet there he was, walking with sure, deliberate steps across the tile. When his eyes met mine, he removed his sunglasses, revealing the stormy, gray-blue eyes I hadn't seen in 3 years. My heart skipped a beat. He walked straight toward me, past stunned guests. No greetings, no handshakes, with the so-called lifelong friends of the family. Then he stopped in front of me. "You came," he said, his voice hoarse but clear, "even when no one wanted you here." I couldn't speak, my throat tightened. He raised a hand and placed it gently on my shoulder, a gesture without grandeur, but with more weight than any speech I'd ever heard. "Everything changes today," he said, looking straight into my eyes. A few guests began whispering. My mother stepped forward, her face rigid like cracked porcelain. "Dad, what are you doing? This is Zachary's wedding. You can't just—" He didn't look at her. The way he ignored her stunned the entire crowd. The lawyer following him stepped up, pulling out a large folder. "Excuse me," he said politely, but with unmistakable seriousness. "Walter Morgan has requested access to this event space due to his legal ownership rights." I heard a stifled laugh from someone in the guest group. Zachary approached, his face pale. "What is this about? He's under medical guardianship. He has no legal authority." "No," Walter interrupted, looking straight at his grandson. "I have never been declared incapacitated. All the documents you submitted are forged, and today I will make this clear before everyone you tried to deceive." The atmosphere thickened. I stood beside him, feeling his hand squeeze my shoulder lightly, as if reminding me not to falter. A server fumbled, asking for instructions from the event staff. Walter turned and gestured toward the path leading to the stage in the vineyard. The bodyguard nodded and stepped forward to pull the microphone from the band. The sound echoed softly, but no one minded. Everyone fell silent, waiting. "I will not disrupt the ceremony," he began, "but if this is where my family publicly honors its legacy, then that legacy must first be cleansed." He looked at me, then spoke slowly, each word like a knife slicing through layers of long-standing deception. "The woman standing here beside me is the only one who has never forgotten Clara. the only one who returned when I needed her, and the one you cast out of this place like a stain. Enough. I heard my mother breathe sharply behind me. It felt as if the ground beneath her feet trembled. But Walter did not stop. "We will continue," he said, "but not according to your script. Everything, from the land, legal documents, to the truth, will be revealed in order, and you, Valentina, will stand at the center, not on the sidelines anymore." I clenched my fists and lifted my head. Perhaps I wasn't ashamed to hear my name spoken in front of a crowd. Maybe that day was truly the day everything began to change. But I did not yet know. The real earthquake was still coming. I stepped onto the stage right after my grandfather, my shoes tapping the wooden floor while my heartbeat struggled to steady. The air seemed to freeze under all those gazes fixed upon me, the champagne glasses suspended between the tables and their owners' hands. My mother stood motionless, one hand gripping her glass, as if letting go would bring the world crashing down. Zachary only looked around, his back stiff as if bearing an invisible weight. Grandpa handed me the microphone. At first, I hesitated. I wasn't used to speaking before a crowd, much less about pain, but this time, fear no longer held me back. "I apologize for interrupting the ceremony," I began, voice slightly trembling, but loud enough to be heard. "But if we are holding an event to honor family, then at least the truth should be here as well." I turned back and pulled a folder from my grandfather's lawyer's hands. The papers inside weren't meant to intimidate. They were everything I had kept for months. "Here?" I said, holding up a copy of the original will dated 8 years ago. "This is the document my grandfather signed, granting me full management of Morgan Estate, witnessed by 3 independent witnesses, and legally notarized in the state of California." I glanced at Zachary. This document was replaced later by another, filed just 2 days after Grandpa was admitted to the hospital with sepsis. My mother immediately cut in, her voice sharp. "You have no right to speak here. Everything was transferred, legally." "Is that so?" I asked softly, then turned to the lawyer. He nodded and slowly pulled out a small device, pressing a button. A recording played in the silent room. "You don't need to read it all, just sign," my mother's voice said. Clear, cold words. "But why transfer the assets now? Dad is still healthy," came my grandfather's voice. "The doctor said you should rest. Leave the rest to us," she replied. The papers rustled. Then silence. Whispers began among the audience. Someone set down a wine glass, the clink audible on the table. I pulled out the signature analysis from an independent legal office. "The signature on the new transfer," I said, "shows signs of psychological coercion and lack of mental capacity at the time of signing. The original will remains valid." Zachary sneered, stepping forward. "This is a fabricated story. You're obsessed with being cut out of the game, now trying to turn the table with emotion." I stared him down. "You call this a game, Zachary?" Then I opened the folder and flipped to a handwritten letter, familiar, careful handwriting, my grandmother Clara's. In the letter, she wrote, "If you're reading this, perhaps the truth has been buried too long. You don't have to fight for anything, Valentina, because everything you've done has proven you are worthy." I handed the letter to my grandfather. He held it a long time without a word. Zachary tried to speak again, but was cut off by the lawyer. "I have filed a petition to restore the original will with the state court, along with full evidence, including the recording, signature analysis, and testimony from hospital witnesses at the time of signing." Guests began to stir. Many stood. Some close family members bowed their heads silently, avoiding eye contact. I looked around the room once known as Zachary's place of honor. Under the soft yellow light, the carefully arranged music, menu, and floral decorations were just a facade. The rotten core inside was now visible to all. Then Grandpa took the microphone again. He didn't need to shout. His voice was low, but sharp enough to make no one look away. "I once believed silence was the way to keep peace," he said, "but today I understand. Silence can also be complicity." He looked straight at my mother. "Diane, bride, groom, I once thought you would carry on the tradition Clara and I built, but I was wrong." You built your reputation on exclusion. Leaves rustled softly in the breeze. I saw my mother's hands clenched tightly, fingernails digging into her skin. Zachary just stood there, his eyes losing their usual sharpness. Grandpa placed his hand on my shoulder. "From today," he said in a calm, deep voice, "this place is no longer home to traitors. If we must start over, it will be with the one who kept the fire burning even when others tried to snuff it out." No applause, no cheers, only truth standing tall, needing no decoration amid wilting bouquets. I opened the yellowed cream envelope Grandpa had just handed me. The paper inside was worn, edges slightly frayed, but the ink remained clear. Under the garden lights, the first line caught my eye. Official will, September 12, 2013. I didn't need to read the entire document to know its content. I had held the original once, on the day my grandfather led me into the small office behind the aging cellar, placed his hand on my shoulder and said, "I have never trusted anyone easily, but you made me believe, naturally." That will clearly stated, granting full ownership, management, and both tangible and intellectual assets of Morgan Estate Vineyards to granddaughter Valentina Morgan, effective immediately while the testator remains mentally competent and has not been declared incapacitated. I looked up, facing the crowd still immersed in silence. Then I handed the will to the lawyer, who read aloud each clause. When he reached the conclusion, he paused, looking directly at my mother and Zachary. "The important point," he said, "is that this will has never been revoked or legally replaced. Any subsequent attempts, although notarized by forged medical documents, are invalid if fraud can be proven." Zachary hurried forward, his voice sharp. "How dare you claim it's legal? Grandpa was ill for nearly a year before hospitalization, and handing over the entire company to a recent college graduate? Who would believe that?" Grandpa cut him off with a cold sentence. "I believe, and that is all that matters." The atmosphere at the reception thickened. Some guests began to leave their tables. No one spoke, but their eyes passed over my mother and Zachary as if reevaluating all the trust they once had. I stepped toward the microphone, keeping my voice steady. 10 years ago, I created my first wine, Clara's Autumn, together with my grandmother. On that very day, my grandfather made this will. No coercion. No one knew except the three of us. I looked toward my mother. "You said I was a burden. You told me to know my place when I left here. But you didn't know. This will existed long before you began to see me as a thorn in your side." My mother tried to maintain composure, but her hands began to tremble as she gripped the back of the chair in front of her. Zachary turned away, looking down at the floor. The lawyer continued. "With confirmation from 2 witnesses, notarization, and clear dates, preceding any medical diagnosis. This will is not only legally valid, it is the sole original, never replaced. And under California law, ownership of all real estate, the brand, and business operations since that day belongs to Valentina Morgan." A woman's voice rang out from the back. "So, Zachary and Diane have been running the company illegally all these years?" No one answered. The question hung in the air like a silent slap. I couldn't see who the woman was, but I knew I was no longer alone. A major investor stepped forward, a man named Martin Crane, who had signed the East Coast distribution contracts for Morgan Wines. He nodded at me, then said in a deep voice, "If what was stated today is true, I will demand an independent audit of the company's finances for the past 12 months. We cannot allow a business built over 3 generations to become a tool for deception." Before I could respond, my mother spun around, her voice harsh. "I did everything to protect the family's reputation. If Valentina takes control, she will burn it all down." Grandpa stepped forward, tapping his cane lightly on the ground. "You hold nothing, Diane. You stole. And the truth is, the child you despised is the only one who kept the roots of this place alive." I swallowed hard. My throat was dry and burning, but I knew if I didn't speak fully, there would be no more chances. I once thought that if I quietly stepped aside, the family would be at peace. I believed giving way was the best way to preserve the last bit of calm. But it turned out that silence gave them the courage to rewrite their history with forged ink. A gentle breeze blew through the tree canopy, scattering a few lavender petals onto the ground. No one spoke. I heard my own heart beating, not out of fear, but because finally, what had never been named had found its voice. And it stood tall in the garden party, wearing a deep blue dress, holding the old will, with eyes no longer avoiding the truth. That night, as the murmurs in the vineyard slowly died down, I received a message consisting of only 3 words: basement, urgent. The sender was Mateo. I left the main house through the back door, stepping quietly as if entering a funeral. The night air in Napa was crisp. Mist hung over the low grapevines, cloaking the vineyard in a thin veil of secrecy. The wine cellar door was slightly ajar when I arrived. Mateo was already waiting, wearing a worn hoodie and a low cap. Maintenance lights cast a pale yellow glow inside, making me feel as if I had returned to my internship days, following my grandmother through every wine-aging inspection. Mateo motioned for silence, then pushed the door wide open. The scent of oak, fermenting grapes, and something unfamiliar hit me immediately. It was no longer the familiar ripe wine aroma. It was sharp, acrid, with a faint chemical taste, but enough for anyone who had lived in this space to know something was wrong. "Do you smell that?" Mateo whispered. I nodded. Industrial alcohol or strong detergent. He led me down the row of stainless steel fermentation tanks. 3 of them were sealed with red tape, something rarely seen unless there's a major issue or a forced emergency stop. Mateo pointed to one labeled C12, short for Clara's Autumn, the last batch my grandmother ever made. "This is the batch you made with Clara, right?" he asked. I clenched my fists. Yes, she wanted one last vintage, just for the 50th anniversary celebration. The tasting notes are still in the journal. She called it the taste of autumn, afternoon before sunset. Mateo opened his phone, found a video, and showed it to me. The security footage was dark but clear. A man entered. Zachary. Behind him was my mother. They stood before the CA-12 tank. Zachary wore gloves, unfolded a ladder near the tank. My mother pulled out a clear glass bottle with its label removed. Zachary climbed up and began pouring liquid into the tank's opening. My mother looked around, then pointed the camera at a corner of the wall, thinking that was enough. But Mateo had installed a second camera behind the ventilation system. My chest tightened. "Why would they destroy it?" I whispered, eyes glued to the screen. Mateo spoke softly. "Because it bears Clara's name. And because it carries your fingerprints. They want to erase all evidence of your and her contributions from the vineyard's legacy." I collapsed onto the cold concrete step. It felt like someone had pulled me straight off the ground. Mateo sat beside me. I managed to retrieve a bottle before they could touch everything. It's in a private storage, and I just sent it to an independent lab in Santa Rosa. I looked at him. "Why are you helping me?" Mateo was silent a moment, then replied, "Because Clara once said, only you understand the true meaning of this place. The others, they just see it as a brand." I put my hand on my forehead. The chemical scent still lingered in the air, a reminder that what I once believed sacred could be stained by greed and coldness. Mateo stood up, walked into the technical room at the back, then returned with a USB drive. I backed up everything: videos, shift logs, manipulated fermentation temperature history, and sensor data detecting foreign substances in tank CA-12. I took the USB, my hand still trembling slightly. "Thank you," I said softly. Mateo nodded. "You know, Clara once told me something. She said if one day this vineyard fell into the hands of people who only count bottles instead of feeling aromas, only Valentina would have the courage to bring it back." I looked at him, my eyes stinging. "Then I won't let her down," I replied, my voice low but certain, "even if it means dragging the truth out from the darkest cellar." We walked out of the cellar together, moonlight stretching across the arch like a silver thread. In my palm, the small USB felt warm, as if a piece of memory had just been pulled back from the abyss of forgetting. But I understood. This was only the first step, and a greater truth still awaited me to uncover. The next morning, I entered the main boardroom, holding the USB. The air was thick with the strong scent of coffee and heavy silence, as if everyone had already heard whispers of what was about to be spoken aloud. The large curtains were drawn shut, blocking out the early morning light. A long table covered with black velvet, leather chairs neatly arranged as for a regular meeting, but the eyes of everyone present were different. Beneath calm appearances were glances full of scrutiny, anticipation, and defense. Zachary sat to my mother's left, still wearing the suit from yesterday, but his tie was crooked and his face showed signs of sleeplessness. My mother sat upright, as if still controlling everything, her hands folded across her chest, a diamond ring shining coldly. Walter had arrived earlier, accompanied by his lawyer and Mr. Crane, a seasoned investor holding most of the shares in brand development on the East Coast market. No one spoke as I walked in. Only Matteo gave a slight nod from the technical area, ready for the presentation. I stood in the middle of the room, placing the USB on the polished wood table like a silent challenge. I request permission to present evidence related to product manipulation and deliberate destruction of the Clara's autumn wine batch, CA12. I said calmly, looking each person in the eye. This is no longer a question of personal feelings or family disputes. This is a responsibility to the brand, to those who have placed their trust in the Morgan name. Zachary sneered. You're trying to fabricate a story based on a few recordings of unclear origin? A production accident is not a criminal offense. I said nothing, signaling Matteo. The room lights dimmed and the projector lit up. Clear images appeared. Footage from security cameras inside the aging room. Zachary and my mother appeared on the screen, with time and location clearly marked. I didn't need to explain further. The scene of my mother opening a bag containing liquid, Zachary climbing the tank, opening the lid, pouring the unlabeled chemical, every move as clear as if someone was confessing in pictures. When the video ended, no one spoke immediately. The only sound left was the soft whistle of wind through a door crack. I stepped forward. And here are the test results for the CA12 wine sample sent to an independent lab in Santa Rosa. The report shows the presence of methyl ethyl ketone A, industrial solvent never allowed in any consumer product, especially food and beverages. I placed the printed report in front of the board members one by one. Mr. Crane opened the document, his eyes scanning each line quickly before looking up straight at me. Can you confirm who submitted this sample for testing? He asked. I did, with witness Matteo, Clara's former assistant, still working at the production facility, I replied. Matteo stepped forward, nodding in confirmation. I collected the sample, sealed it, and delivered it directly to the lab. I also backed up all security footage and production logs during that period. Zachary jumped up, his chair tipping backward. She's trying to frame me. This is a conspiracy. Matteo, have you been bribed? I don't sell out to anyone, Matteo said evenly but firmly. I just don't want to see this place stained by those willing to destroy all values to keep control. Another board member, Mrs. Evelyn Hart, representing Texas investors, slowly folded the report. We don't care who runs the company for personal reasons, she said. We care about the reputation and reliability of the Morgan product. If what's been presented is true, this is no longer an internal dispute, but a serious ethical violation. Walter stood up, stepping to the center of the room. I have reinstated all legal rights. From today, Valentina Morgan is the sole lawful operator of Morgan Estate Vineyards by the power of attorney signed and notarized 3 weeks ago. His lawyer presented a copy of the legal document, fully signed, no one objected. I looked at my mother. She said nothing. Her eyes looked drained. Zachary just stood silently, hands clenched tightly. Those who once walked these halls as if on velvet now faced a mirror, reflecting all they tried to hide. Mr. Crane leaned back in his chair, his eyes seeming older after this morning. If you don't stand up, he said to me, The Morgan name will die slowly, in silence. I looked around the room. The plaques on the wall, the black and white photos of my grandparents beside the first wooden barrels. I said nothing more. I didn't have to. Everything that needed proving was already crystal clear. And though my heart still felt heavy, I knew I was standing in the only place where I no longer needed permission to be present. 3 weeks after that fateful meeting, the law firm sent official notices to all shareholders confirming full operational control had been legally transferred to me. Emails from partners began flooding in, requesting updates on production status, financials, and quality commitments. I spent most of my time in the office, responding to each file, reviewing all active contracts. But even as paperwork was neatly handled, I knew another earthquake had begun outside the boardroom. The Napa County District Attorney opened a formal investigation. My mother, Diane, faced charges of abusing guardianship powers to alter assets without the consent of the ward. The forged mental health records of my grandfather were exposed, accompanied by the signature of a doctor known to her, who was later listed as a suspect in the investigation. Zachary's situation was different. He had no way out. The sabotage of the Clara's autumn batch, deliberately introducing industrial chemicals into a consumer product, was considered a high-level criminal offense with a possible sentence of up to 10 years in prison. He remained silent, made no public statements, and has not appeared at the company since the meeting. His lawyer requested bail, but the case was reported by local media, and major distributors unanimously demanded Zachary's name be removed from all marketing materials. I was not satisfied, not pleased. I did not find the sense of victory people often described. There was no gratification in watching someone who once called me a burden, now caught in a whirlpool of public scrutiny and the law. Only a strange emptiness clung to me every afternoon, sitting alone in my late grandmother Clara's office, a room smelling of old paper and grapefruit oil. That afternoon, I drove to the cemetery on the hill, where she was buried beside the lavender fields she once tended. I brought a bottle of Clara's Autumn, the only intact sample preserved for 10 years more as an heirloom than a product. That day was overcast. Gray clouds drifted slowly over the hilltop. I stepped down, my shoes sinking into the damp grass, holding a small glass of wine already poured. My grandmother's tombstone was simple, engraved only with Clara Evelyn Morgan, 1938 to 2016, the keeper of the flame. No flowers, no angel statues, just a bunch of dried lavender someone had left a few days before. I sat down, quietly, for a long while. "I did exactly what you taught me," I whispered. No loud voices, no stomping, just standing still without backing down. I placed the glass next to the tombstone where she could see if she still watched me, the way I always felt standing in the dark cellar among oak arches heavy with the scent of aging grapes. "I'm not doing this out of anger," I continued, my voice fading. "Nor am I doing it for revenge. I only want to protect what you built with your whole life. Because no one has the right to destroy something sacred just because they think they can." The wind swept through the edge of my coat, carrying the soft rustle of low bushes around the grave. I closed my eyes, as if I could hear her laughter, light as a breath, that had guided me through countless hard harvest seasons. I placed my hand on the ground before the tombstone, the coolness seeping through my palm. A feeling of peace crept into my chest, the kind of peace I had lost for so long before finding again. Not easy serenity, but the peace that comes from standing up when no one else will. I carried no grand promises, only one. I would keep everything from being forgotten. Then I stood, brushing the grass off my skirt, and walked slowly to the car. Before closing the door, I glanced back at the grave once more. The wine glass remained, its deep red sparkling faintly in the dim light like a final farewell. I didn't cry. My pain had passed beyond tears. Now it quietly turned into action, and action, if steady enough, becomes a legacy. 3 months passed since that silent afternoon at her grave. Spring in Napa turned with gentle breezes carrying the scent of young grapes and warm earth. The old vines were pruned back, broken pine stakes replaced with fresh ones, and the old Morgan Estate sign was taken down. No fanfare, no press conference, just an early morning with a screwdriver and a small ladder as I removed each screw from the weathered wooden frame. After wiping away thick dust, I place a new hand-engraved copper plaque. Eleonora Grace Vineyards. Eleonora was Clara's middle name, one she always said was reserved for special occasions. Grace was the one thing she never demanded but always preserved in her words and gestures. I didn't hire a photographer, no promotional videos, no one witnessed the moment the sign was mounted except Matteo, standing a few steps away with his wooden shovel still covered in dirt. "Are you sure you want to rename it entirely?" he asked. Yeah. The old name was a legacy, but it was also a tool to hide the truth. I want to start over, not to erase the past, but to call what remains by its true name. Matteo nodded. Then this is the time. I don't know if there's ever a perfect time to begin again, but I know exactly what will slowly die if it's not properly revived. During the first week, I closed all major distribution outlets. Suspended export contracts, sent letters to every distributor apologizing for the delay and promising new samples within 6 months. No one showed anger. On the contrary, many wrote back, saying they'd never seen a braver decision from a brand rooted in family. I didn't feel brave. I was just trying to live true to her memory. I reconstructed the old blueprint Clara had once sketched, an enlarged printout found in an old leather notebook Matteo had discovered in the desk drawer. It was a simple hand-drawn map with notes in purple ink. Syrah vines should be planted along the western edge. The breeze there is mildest in early summer, and in the lower left corner, a small line whispered, "Leave a path for my students." I followed it exactly. I called workers to build a gravel path from the main cellar to the garden, just wide enough for 2 people to walk side by side. At the end, I placed a bench made of reclaimed pine, engraved with the phrase, "You may sit here if you know how to listen." The vineyard was no longer just a place to sell wine. I reached out to the local university, inviting agriculture and food science students to visit, taste, and learn how to sense each layer of aroma, each weather shift in the wine. No fees. They only needed to bring a notebook or a question deep enough. The first class had 9 students, 6 women, 3 men, mostly in their early 20s. They entered the vineyard with eyes sparkling like mine had when I was 17, hearing Clara say for the first time, "Wine is not for drinking, it's for remembering." I held the class in a small space beside the cellar where soft light from string bulbs and the scent of aging oak filled every sense. We didn't use crystal glasses. I used Clara's old earthenware cups, the kind, she said, hold the aroma longer on windy days. One student asked, "Aren't you afraid of losing money opening a class like this?" I smiled. Actually, I'm more afraid of what I learned disappearing without anyone inheriting it. Each class ended with a minute of silence in the vineyard, not to pray, just to stand still and let the earth speak. I found myself breathing easier each day. Though the work was heavy and finances uncertain, at least I knew every decision, every vine, kept or replaced, was driven not by ambition, but by gratitude. One early morning, I stood by the newly planted vines, hearing hens clucking from the farm across the hill. Matteo approached, holding a small notebook. "I found this in the old cellar," he said, handing it to me. Inside was a list of people who had worked under Clara, handwritten notes beside each name. Loyal, honest, call back. I smiled. Then call them. No interviews, no thick contracts, just a sincere call and an invitation to return if they still loved this land. And we didn't restart as a business, we returned as a community. And that land, under its new name, began to breathe again. Not for profit, not for fame, but because of the hands that once touched it with all their love, even if no one noticed. That afternoon, Eleonora Grace Vineyard was bathed in golden sunlight pouring through olive branches. No lavish backdrops, no staged events or reporters waiting at the gate. Everything was strangely simple: tables made from old wooden barrels, hand-embroidered tablecloths brought by local seamstresses, lavender in empty wine bottles, and music only the rustic guitar of a third-year agriculture student doing a summer internship. The guests were fewer than at the launch parties I'd seen in my memories, but each person present carried something real with them. Maria, the neighbor, brought a wood-fired apple pie baked in an oven from 1960. The Reeves, a father and son who had worked as day laborers since Clara's time, wore cowboy hats and brought a bundle of purple corn as a gift. The children ran between rows of low-hanging string lights, laughing loudly every time someone offered them chilled grapes to taste. I stood tucked behind the row of tables, my shirt sleeves rolled up, hands still stained with dried mud from planting a few new muskrat vines earlier that morning. Mateo came over, handing me a light glass of wine. "You haven't said anything to everyone yet," he reminded me. I looked around. No one was looking directly at me, but all were already listening. I nodded and stepped up onto the old wooden platform made by stacking 3 wine barrels. No microphone, no speakers. I just needed to speak loud enough for those nearby to hear clearly, and those farther away could step closer if they wished. "Thank you all for being here tonight," I began, my voice deep but clear. "I know this evening isn't what most would call a celebration, but to me, it's exactly what I've hoped for: simple, close, and sincere." Everything slowed down in the yard: the soft clinking of plates, the rustling of leaves, the children's chatter by the grass grew gentler. I continued. "I once thought what I inherited was a piece of land, a brand, an estate. But the more I lived with this place, the more I studied my grandmother's old notebooks, the more I realized what I truly received was trust." My eyes passed over every familiar face. Walter sat farther away, his posture steadier than before, his eyes gleaming as if recalling something lost. Mateo stood a few steps away, his daughter, little Talia, holding his hand, the other clutching something hidden behind her back. I looked toward Mrs. Haird, the woman who had strongly opposed me on the board. Today she wasn't wearing a gray suit, but only a simple earth-toned wool scarf and worn rubber boots. She clinked glasses gently with the person beside her, then nodded toward me. "And because I understand that," I spoke slowly, "today, I'm not keeping that trust to myself. I want to give it back, to share it, with those who have preserved this place, not with shares, but with hands, with time, with faith that the seeds planted can bear fruit." At that moment, a small movement made me pause. Talia shyly stepped forward, her hair in pigtails, cheeks flushed as if she'd just run around the flower bed several times. "Miss Valentina," she whispered, "Dad said this is the first bunch of grapes to grow from the muscat vines you planted." She held out her hand. In her small palm was a deep purple cluster of grapes, plump like shining jewels under the sun. I bent down, took the tiny bunch in both hands, her fingers cold, but my palm burning. "Thank you, Talia," I said softly, then pulled her into a hug. No one applauded or cheered, but I heard a relieved sigh from someone behind me. Then the soft clinking of glasses. One person raised a glass, then another. No signal was needed. They toasted not for a successful launch, but because they had just witnessed something beyond achievement. A connection, a passing of the torch, a circle closing not with fame, but with rebirth. I still stood there, holding the small cluster as if clutching the heartbeat of something very old just awakened. I didn't get back the old family. But here, among those once forgotten like me, among hands that quietly upheld this place without mention, I found another family, a family created from trust, from the simplest things, and I felt truly able to stand in the light without bowing before anyone. What would you do if one day the place that once hurt you became the place that healed you? If you'd ever been pushed out of your own home, would you choose to come back to reclaim it, or to rebuild it your own way? I chose not to seek revenge. In anger, I chose to keep the most beautiful part my grandmother left behind and continue it with my own hands. Not to prove anything, but to give back what I once received, trust. If this story reminds you of someone, or if you've quietly stood on the sidelines at a family gathering, please share your thoughts in the comments. I'll listen, because maybe somewhere your story will touch someone else, as mine once did. And if you want to keep following stories about family bonds, loss, rebirth, and unexpected choices within families, please subscribe to the channel, because what we share today might be what someone needs to hear tomorrow.